Hey you guys, it's Peter and welcome to my channel, Peter's Movie Reviews. And today I want to react to and talk about the new Netflix documentary, Kidnapped, Elizabeth Smart. I watched it last night and I have lots of thoughts about it, so I want to get into that in just a second. But before I do, I want to explain my coverage of true crime because some people seem kind of confused about it. Okay, so for those of you that know, I love true crime. I've seen like every major and low budget true crime documentary and documentary series that is out there. For probably the last 2 years, I've covered most of them on my Peter Watches TV channel, which is where I react to TV shows. That's listed in the description box below. I just made a recent decision that if it is a standalone true crime documentary that's like an hour and a half to 2 hours, I will be covering it over here. If it is a series, which has several episodes in it, then I will still continue to cover those over on my TV channel. I just want to make that very, very clear. Most of the true crime documentaries or documentary series that come out, I will be covering either here or there. So if you guys want to know what I think about any new true crime documentary, let me know. If you'd like me to go back and rewatch a true crime documentary, I started that recently. Well, it's not true crime, but with the Wild and Wonderful Whites of West Virginia, I rewatched that. There's a couple documentaries that I want to go back and rewatch, but I'm open to any suggestions. Not just true crime, but any documentaries as well. I love documentary film. Okay, so let's talk about the new documentary that came out on Netflix. I think it came out earlier this week. That's called Kidnapped, Elizabeth Smart. It's, I think it's like an hour and a half long, maybe an hour and 40 minutes long, and it's like number 2 on the top 10 movies on Netflix right now. So here's my deal with the Netflix documentaries that have come out recently. I feel like with like the O.J. Simpson one and the JonBenet Ramsey one, both cases that I am like very heavily interested in, I feel like it's just a retelling of the story all over again, and then they just add a little bit to the end of it to get people interested in and talking about it. I don't really think there's a lot of new information. The Amy Bradley documentary I thought was fantastically done. I thought it was a lot of new information. I thought it was a lot of new speculation. So a documentary like Amy Bradley, I was greatly interested in. But like recently I just watched and covered the Jodi Hildebrandt story, which was the friend and counselor with Ruby Franke and the 8-Passenger YouTube channel. I had watched the 2 previous documentaries that were about Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrandt, and I felt like this was completely just a retelling of that. And I've noticed specifically Netflix has done this a lot lately, where they just take a story and that's been done like Elizabeth Smart. There are several documentaries out there, I've seen some of them, that they just take the story and then they kind of like regurgitate it. They have some of the same people interviewed from a different point of view, and then they retell it because they think it's just going to be a hot topic that's going to trend. I don't love that. And sometimes I don't know that I even really feel like there's a purpose to it. And I feel like it's almost kind of negligent to the case and the victims themselves, even if they participate in it. I don't know. I just sometimes have an issue with it. So I was talking to my best friend last night. We were talking about different shows, and she said, "What are you going to watch tonight?" And I said, "I'm really wanting to watch this Elizabeth Smart documentary, but I don't want to watch it if it's just going to be completely a retelling of things." And she said, "Oh no, it's fantastic." She said, "Unlike the other documentaries, almost everybody except Elizabeth's mom is interviewed in it. Elizabeth is interviewed in it in the last half." She said, "It's fantastically done." I said, "Okay, I'm going to watch it." So I watched it last night, and I was blown away. I thought it was just beautifully done. I have to tell you, this very rarely happens in true crime documentaries, but and I'm a big crier. I was crying at the end of it. In a way that I feel like not many documentaries or true crime documentaries really capture the essence and the message of like the victims and their stories afterwards. I felt like the Elizabeth Smart documentary on Netflix really, really did that. Now, I will say this before I get into it. I remember the kidnapping of Elizabeth Smart. It happened in 2002 in a suburb outside of Salt Lake City. And I remember it happening, and I also remember, I did not follow the case at that time, and I also remember her being found by the police, and I could remember that the man that took her, I didn't remember that there was another woman. When I saw the pictures of the man that took her and his wife and her, like I remembered seeing 3 of them back in the day, but like if you had asked me, I wouldn't have remembered that. I didn't follow this case that closely, and to be honest with you, that's probably one of the reasons why I really enjoyed the documentary. I don't love to watch like the Murdaugh cases. Like one of my good friends, she like loves everything about the Murdaugh cases. Unless they're gonna like bring out something new, I don't really need a new stance on it. Although I will tell you, one of the last books that we read for our true crime book club so I hosted a true crime book club with my friend Mel for 5 years. It's since been closed down. We're starting a new book club. But one of the last books that we read had something to do with blood. But anyway, it was by Mandy Matney. And she was a journalist that was like first on and covered the Murdaugh cases. It is probably the best coverage of the Murdaugh cases I've ever read. I mean, she has a podcast as well that she did of the Murdaugh murders. The book is fantastic. So anyway, it's probably one of the most similar books that I've ever read to Michelle McNamara's I'll Be Gone in the Dark, One Woman's Obsessive Search for the Golden State Killer. And the movie on HBO is fantastic too, but I love that book by Michelle McNamara. Mandy Matney's book is very, very similar to that. She brings in a lot of like her personal stories. And it also talks a lot about Stephen Smith in that book as well, if you know the Murdaugh case at all. But anyway, I'm not somebody that wants to watch like 15 different documentaries. Kidnappings, I have to tell you, are true crime documentaries that I'm very, very interested in. There's some true crime documentaries that I will watch for the information, but I just can't really, like, I can't watch too much of it. Like Family Annihilators, like Chris Watts, it's too disturbing to me that I can watch like one and be educated on it, but after that I'm just kind of like, unless there's tons of new information that comes out, I'm not about it. But kidnappings are very interesting to me, and in fact, I've shared this story quite a bit on my vlog channel. That I had a babysitter when I was younger that was actually, she was kidnapped, she and a friend, and they were held for ransom for like 2 weeks. And they ended up letting them go because the ransom was paid and things like that, but that was in the 70s. The era that I grew up in, the 70s, I mean, I remember like having school functions talking about kidnapping. So kidnappings have always been something kind of in my head. I remember my dad specifically having conversations with me about if I was ever kidnapped, like code words we would have. And I mean, it was a big thing we talked about in the 70s and 80s. And then as I got older, I would read like books that had, like fictional books that had to do with kidnappings, or, you know, watch movies of it. And then I've read the J.C. Duggar books, which are fantastically done as well. But like, I didn't know a lot about the Elizabeth Smart case. I knew that she had been kidnapped, and I knew that she had been found. And I knew that. And I knew that the people that kidnapped her wore some kind of like religious like clothing, but I didn't really know much more than that because I saw it like on, you know, articles and magazines and stuff like that. So when I went into this documentary, and I don't want to ruin it for anybody that has seen it, but if you know the story, it's not going to really ruin it for you. It goes in, and it starts with, so the people that are, it's heavily, heavily relies on interviews from her family members and detectives, which is fantastically done. Her dad is heavily interviewed. Her mom has chosen not to be interviewed. They explain at the end of the documentary that her mom has chosen to kind of like leave this in the past and move on, that she did a lot of advocacy work and things like that. And I totally understand that. You know, it's been, I mean, at this point, what, 24 years since the kidnapping occurred? And even like Elizabeth says at the end of it that she's kind of like almost there. Like, she does a lot of advocacy work, and they started a foundation and things like that. And she wants to share her story to give hope. This woman, this young woman, Elizabeth Smart, even at 14 when she was kidnapped, was, I mean, it sounds ridiculous to say it because her last name is Smart, but I mean, she was so smart. The things she thought about and the way that she thought it through, and like, even at 14 years old, knowing like, I'm going to have one chance to get away and I've got to do it. Like, police came up to them in the library, and she like wouldn't say anything because she was like, if he doesn't take me, then I am screwed. Like, this is my one chance. I mean, she thought all this through. I mean, I was just mesmerized watching the brilliance of this woman. Not only that, but her strength and her resilience. I mean, her story, they called her like, you know, the miracle or whatever when she was found. She really is. And like, her story, even for me, is like so inspiring, because at the end of it, she talks about like today, if there's something she wants to achieve or something she wants to do, and she doesn't feel like she can do it, she's like, no, you made it through this. You can do anything. And I was like listening to it, and like tears are going down. She's like climbing this mountain in Utah, and tears are like going down my face. I'm like, this woman, like her, like, she said, you know, like, she asks herself a lot, like, what if I wasn't kidnapped? What would my life look like now? And like, there's not really a point to thinking that way because this is what happened. So basically, it's me having to like decide, what am I going to do with this event that happened in my life? Well, I've lived through a lot of that, you know, and it was just so poignant to me when she said it. Like I said, I don't want to ruin the documentary for a lot of people. It starts off with the night that she gets kidnapped, and then her sister, Mary Catherine, hearing somebody come into the room and talk to her, and she knew it was a man's voice. She knew the voice, but she didn't know who it was. And then her parents going on this whole search, Her uncles are heavily interviewed. Her sister is heavily interviewed. You can tell her sister is still like, I mean, she's like, today, I still think about this and that she blames herself a lot for it. And they interview the one police detective that he ends up moving away halfway through the case and taking another job, but he becomes kind of like emotionally obsessed with this case in a good way and follows up with it. But when watching it, like my friend said to me, she said the police could have done so much more than they did because they were focused on the family. And she said it was really a media thing. This was before I watched it. So I didn't really know what she was talking about. And I said, what do you mean? She goes, the media really led us to believe that it was a family member. And she said, I watched it closely. She goes, I would have sworn that the uncle did it at that time. She goes, at that time, the media was so heavily focused on the family, it had to be a family member. I didn't remember that. But they go into that and they show it. Like, that's probably the first third of the documentary is like the father is like alleged to have done it. And then, you know, so the kidnapper put a chair up outside, cut a hole through the screen, came inside, came into Elizabeth's room. So it had to have been somebody that knew Elizabeth. So then the father is like heavily targeted as being the person that did it. Like, even his wife calls him and says, they think that you're involved and you have to come down to the police station. So he passes a polygraph test. The brother doesn't pass the uncle doesn't pass a polygraph test. You know, I don't know. It's just like the whole thing was so sad. The first half of it's all involved in that. Well, then Mary Catherine, she remembers the voice that she heard. She could never place it. And it was this guy that they had seen in downtown around, like, her mom would take them there to, like, give people that were homeless food and things like that. And they met this guy there. Well, the guy ended up, I don't know why can I not remember this guy? Well, he has like 4 names because he has the name that he goes by, which I think is Emmanuel. That's his, like, religious name. And then his wife's name is, like, Herskabab or something like that. But that's a made-up name, too. I think her name's Wanda. His name's, like, John David something. Anyway, so they met him there. But then his wife was like, if you ever need work, come to my house. So he came to the house. And that's where Mary Catherine remembered him from. So she remembers the voice. Well, she tells her dad and her mom and dad when they're like on a date night or whatever, they come home. He immediately calls the police detective. The police, like, they do like a drawing of it. They don't take her very seriously at all. And it just really slows things down. I mean, they're willing to, like, at this point they have this other guy, why can't I think of his name? But anyway, they swear that he did it because he worked at their house too. And then he ends up having a stroke or a heart attack and he dies in jail. So they feel like all the secrets died from him, but he was not connected to it at all. The police just really did a botched up job. I mean, in all honesty, there wasn't really a lot to go on for the police to do it. But what was interesting was when Mary Catherine came up with this information, it's like they didn't want to listen to her. They made every excuse in the book. They made every excuse in the book to go towards the father and the uncle and everything out. But then they made every excuse in the world to not believe the daughter, the sister, and say, well, her memory might not have been good. She was half asleep. You know, it's voice recognition. They wouldn't go with it. So then they had this artist come and recreate what this Emmanuel, I think that's his name is. I know people are correcting me in the comment section below. But anyway, what he looked like. And they did like this perfect representation of it. And the police are like, no, we're not going to release it. Now, I understand this from having watched a lot of these documentaries. The police didn't want to release it because if they did, it would maybe scare the kidnapper and then he might harm Elizabeth more. I totally understand that. But then the family's told they can't talk about it, okay? They end up finally, like, the police are like, we've done everything we can do. So the family finally, they release the picture, okay? And that's when people start saying, we've seen him here, we've seen him there. A woman calls because Elizabeth is so brilliant, okay? Now, at this point, YouTube does not like me to use the R word and the SA word and things like that, but she is being violated and abused every single day, multiple times a day, okay? And she is scared for her life. She's kind of like, I wouldn't say like Stockholm syndrome, but he's constantly threatening her life and especially her family's life. And he's also told her that he and his wife were told that they had to kidnap seven daughters, basically. And so he says her sister will be one of them, her cousin will be one of them, which incidentally, somebody tries to break into the cousin's house and kidnap her. And so Elizabeth's like staying kind of out of protection for her family a little bit. Well, they're going all over the world. They're in San Diego, and they're talking about how they have to get, like, to the East Coast. And Elizabeth is like, I mean, she's 14 years old. I never thought on this level at 14. And I was a pretty savvy teenager. She said, if they get me to the East Coast, like New York City, I'll never be found. Like, nobody's going to care. They're not going to think we look weird or anything like that. They're in, like, this, like, park in San Diego, outside of San Diego. So they're around this fire and they're talking, and she says something about, like, God is like, I know you don't think that God has spoken to me, but I think God wants us to go back to Salt Lake City because he really does believe that you're like the one true one. Well, he completely eats it up. And he's like, oh my God, God is speaking to you now because I knew if you just listened to us and we gave you enough time that God would come through. And yes, we should go back to Salt Lake City. Brilliant. I mean, it was brilliant. And I was like, oh my God, she is so smart. Like, I would never have thought about that. And I was like, oh my God. And so they go back to Salt Lake City and they get off the bus. And as soon as they're walking down the street, this woman calls in and is like, I think I saw them walking down the street, because everybody in Salt Lake City has seen him. And there's one part too that Elizabeth talks about, like at the beginning, she heard a man calling her name in the woods. And, Emmanuel, or whatever his name is, came in and said, if they come onto our property, like if they come into our, into the whatever you call it, our camp, then I will kill you and I will kill him and it will be your fault. She also, and I thought this was a really interesting aspect, having grown up in the LDS church and being very, very religious, from a very religious family, she was taught, like, she was like, I hadn't even held a boy's hand, I hadn't been kissed, I hadn't gone on a date. She was like, I was taught that you save sex for marriage. So since she had been violated by this man multiple times, there was a lot of internal shame that she had because she hadn't been taught the difference between consent and non-consent. I thought it was so interesting to hear her talk about that because, I mean, I'm not from that kind of like strict religious background, so I wouldn't have even thought about that. And I think that she explains so well kind of in her own story of what shame and guilt look like when you're the victim. I thought it was fantastically done. The whole time she was thinking about her family, she was thinking about her sister, she was thinking about her mom. And so the police are all like surrounding this car. They come up to her and they're like, are you Elizabeth Smart? She won't say anything because she's terrified. She's like, but she's like, if he gets me back up to the woods, I'm never going to be found again. So she says something like, in like the language that they use, like biblical language, something like, I don't know, and he's like, the police officer's like, that's good enough for me. And he puts her in the back of the car and she starts crying immediately. But then she feels like she's in trouble and her dad comes. It's really kind of sad. Her dad comes and he's like, Elizabeth, is that you? Like, they show the footage of it in the room. And she like tentatively stands up and she's like scared to death because she's like, she thought she was in trouble. This is the long-standing guilt and shame that victims of any kind of abuse, let alone kidnapping, have. I mean, I've heard that, like, I've watched other kidnapping documentaries where they've reached out to Elizabeth Smart and her family to, like, give them suggestions on what to do and handle in that situation, which I think it's fantastic that she's an advocate that way. So then it shows about her coming home and how happy the family is, and she's so excited to be home and stuff like that. She talks about the trial being really, really long, like years long, almost a decade, and that she finally like faced him and said what happened and that she was afraid to do that, but she just wanted it to be over. He ended up getting life in prison without parole for like kidnapping, what he did to her, and then trying to take her over state lines. His wife basically got the same ones as well, but she got 15 years in prison and she was released in 2018. I have no idea where she's at today. I thought the documentary was fantastic, but at the end of it, it's like she stays in contact with her parents a lot and stuff. Her parents are divorced now. I looked it all up online. I'm not going to bring it into this because it has no bearing on the documentary, but you guys can look it up if you're interested in it. And she says in there, my mom didn't want to be part of the documentary, and she explains it. Her dad and her are really close. Her sister and her are really close. But it's really a story of hope and motivation. And basically, like, if I can make it through this, you can make it through anything. And it was really inspiring at the end of it. It was a fantastic documentary. I loved it. And it will be a documentary that I recommend to people for a long time. So anyway, I would highly recommend it. Let me know what you thought in the comment section below. I love you guys. Any documentaries you want me to watch, old or new, and respond to, put it in the comment section below, and I will do that. I love you guys, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.